Did you know there are more than 60 models that try to explain what started an ice age, and almost all of them have problems?
Yes, but there's one that works, and it accounts for the environmental conditions needed to trigger and then to maintain an ice age for hundreds of years.
Stick around. We'll explain why this model works, and we'll cover many other questions about what the ice age was like.
Welcome to Creation Magazine Live. My name's Richard Fangrad.
And I'm Thomas Bailey. Today we'll share details on a climate model that would initiate and sustain an ice age. A model that's both far superior to most other models, yet also widely rejected.
What? A model that works, yet is widely rejected? And why would that be?
Because it's a model derived from the historical events recorded in the Bible.
Yeah. So it comes down to which history researchers believe is true, doesn't it?
That's right. When trying to reconstruct how the world came to be the way we see it, the models that researchers choose to develop, whether it's models about how dinosaurs died, or how the continents moved apart, or how the Earth's geological features formed, or today's topic, how to start an ice age, the models developed in an attempt to explain these things always begin with beliefs about history.
Yeah, and those who believe the history in the Bible, that God created fairly recently in 6 days and there was a global flood, they're going to base their models on that history.
Note that no historical events can be proven scientifically, because strictly speaking, science has to do with what can be observed, tested, falsified, etc., and just can't observe a historical event. So we'll compare models based on biblical history and the alternate no God, millions of years, slow processes history. And spoiler alert, there will be a clear winner.
Okay, all right. Let's give a bit of background first. In the 1830s, Charles Lyell published his Principles of Geology, and many geologists accepted the key idea that he presented, that the geological processes we see operating today were operating at the same rate in the past.
His belief was that processes and events like erosion, delta formation, local floods, earthquakes, and volcanoes contributed to the landforms we see today, but not the Genesis flood.
No. Now, this belief can be summed up in a couple of phrases: slow and gradual, and the present is the key to the past, or in a single word, uniformitarianism. Belief in uniformitarianism in geology rules out catastrophic events like the flood described in Genesis.
But in 1840, Louis Agassiz, a biologist and geologist, proposed that there had been an ice age when humans were around. Well, that created problems for those who held to uniformitarianism,
Right.
And many, including Lyell, wouldn't accept the idea that an ice age had happened.
Yeah, they didn't like the idea of an ice age for two reasons. One, they believed that the Earth was slowly cooling down from its molten past, and an ice age couldn't have started in the hotter past. And two, an ice age required a catastrophe, which was contrary to their belief in uniformitarianism.
But eventually, geologists accepted the overwhelming evidence that ice sheets in the recent past had covered portions of North America, Europe, and Asia.
Yeah, they recognized that as the ice sheets melted, they left behind features similar to those behind receding mountain glaciers today.
These features include ridges of rock debris called moraines, and scratched boulders and bedrock made by massive amounts of ice grinding the ground and pushing rock debris.
Yeah, ice age features are found on over 30% of the land surface. That indicates the extent of the ice sheets and glaciers. Only 10% of the world's land surface is glaciated today, mainly in Antarctica and Greenland.
After about 40 years of debate, the idea that there had been an ice age was accepted by those who held to uniformitarianism, and they absorbed it into their uniformitarian beliefs by convincing themselves that many ice ages had occurred. Today, it is believed there were 5 or 6 major ice ages, but over 50 of varying intensity over the past 2.6 million years.
But there was a problem. They needed to come up with a way to explain how ice ages, plural, could happen repeatedly.
Right.
And that's another complication. Let's just focus on getting one going. What are the weather conditions needed to generate an ice age?
An ice age requires 2 main conditions: cooler summers, and more snow than we have today.
Yeah.
And those two conditions need to persist in a relatively stable climate for hundreds of years.
Yeah, more snowfall, that's kind of an obvious one. Yeah. But why cooler summers? It's because at least some of the snow that falls in winter has to last through the summer to the next winter. Then with more snow than we get now, it can build up year after year for decades or centuries to get the thick ice sheets that characterize an ice age. That's what it's all about.
We'll talk about proposed theories to produce those conditions after a short break.
Carbon-14 is an unstable form of carbon that decays into nitrogen-14 at a measured rate, and this forms the basis of carbon-14 dating. In 2003, a group of researchers performed an unusual test on 10 coal samples obtained from Pennsylvania State University. The researchers wanted to see if carbon-14 could be detected in the coal samples. This test might be considered unusual because carbon-14 decays relatively fast and should not be detectable after a maximum of 90,000 years. Yet the coal samples tested came from strata allegedly ranging in the age from 37 million to 318 million years. The laboratory tests were clear. All of the 10 coal samples contained carbon-14 and similar amounts. This seriously undermines the evolutionary dates for the rock strata containing the coal, because the presence of carbon-14 affirms that the coal samples cannot be millions of years old. The results fit nicely with the coal forming from vegetation that was buried in Noah's flood.
To find out more from Creation Ministries International, visit our website, creation.com.
Welcome back. So, what environmental conditions would cause lots of snow and cooler summers to last for hundreds of years? Now, the answer isn't what you'd expect, but first, let's start with conditions that don't work.
Right. More than 60 theories have been proposed for how an ice age can happen.
Yeah.
Terrestrial theories include decreases in CO2, volcanic dust, sudden surging of the West Antarctic ice sheet into the ocean, continental drift, and mountain building.
Now, one Ice Age expert, J.K. Charlesworth, said about Ice Age theories, Ice Age phenomena have produced an absolute riot of theories ranging from the remotely possible to the mutually contradictory and the palpably inadequate.
He said that in 1957, and logically, you'd think that great progress has been made since then.
Right, yeah, but that's not the case. In 2001, Ice Age expert David Alt stated, although theories abound, no one really knows what causes ice ages. So, okay, how come secular models aren't any closer to solving this? I mean, what's the problem here?
The problem is many proposed ice age models involve cooling the whole Earth.
Yeah.
But colder winters won't produce an ice age. In fact, winters in northern Canada, Siberia, and Antarctica are too cold today to start an ice age.
Okay, now why is that? It's because the colder the air, the drier it is. It holds less moisture, and that results in a decrease in snowfall, not the increase that we need to get an ice age going.
A widely believed theory for how ice ages occur proposes that changes in Earth's orbit varies the temperature enough to create conditions which will produce repeated ice ages. This theory, called the Milankovitch or astronomical theory, has ice ages cycling every 40,000 to 100,000 years.
Now, we can't analyze that theory here in detail. We're not going to do that. We don't have time for that. If you want details on the Milankovitch cycles, do a search on that at creation.com, and you'll find a detailed description there of why it won't lead to an ice age. The bottom line is this. The reduced sunshine produced as a result of that would not be sufficient to change the Earth's climate.
So what actually happened to get the ice age that we actually had?
Before we continue, we should note that like much of the content for today's episode is based on work done over many years by Michael Ord, a scientist with a specialty in meteorology. Okay, so what is going to get the job done?
Conditions after a global flood, documented in the Bible, provide the only viable explanation for how the ice age occurred.
Right.
Now, we'll explain how in a minute, but obviously, that's not going to sit well with folks who think the Bible, especially the Old Testament, and especially the part of the Old Testament before Abraham, is nothing more than a collection of fairy stories.
Right. And if that's what you think, please stick with us, okay? You might be surprised, and as we go on, we hope that you'll perhaps consider that the Bible does accurately record history beginning all the way back with creation.
And that history includes a global, world-covering flood that produced massive changes in the climate. Those changes kick-started the Ice Age, which followed the flood.
Okay, so let's examine the post-flood conditions that produced an ice age.
The first condition necessary for an ice age is warm oceans. Warm ocean water produces more evaporation, more water vapor that would eventually be dumped on the land as huge snowfalls.
So as it turns out, heat is the key ingredient for producing more snow.
That's right. And it's the missing ingredient in the other models that don't work.
We see an example of this phenomenon on a small scale. Just south of our recording studio here, in early winter, when a southwest wind blows over Lake Erie, which was warmed by the summer sun, it picks up a lot of moisture and dumps it as snow on Buffalo and other parts of upstate New York.
The Weather Channel states, big lake effect snow events are much more likely if and when cold air enters the equation earlier in the season, because the temperature of the lake and the air above it is warmer, increasing the chance for heavy snow.
Now, today's oceans are too cold near the poles to give off a lot of water vapor. For example, the average temperature of the ocean water off the coast of northern Canada in February is minus 1.8 Celsius. That's below freezing.
During the flood, both volcanic activity heated the oceans, and the tectonic activity allowed very hot rock deep in the earth to come to the surface, also heating the oceans. So right after the flood, the oceans would have been a lot warmer than they are today, and that provides a mechanism to produce more snow.
Right. There's evidence that the ocean waters were warmer just before the Ice Age, as recorded by the oxygen isotopes in the shells of tiny marine animals called Foraminifera. Now, what about the other conditions? Now, what about cooler summers? So we got warmer ocean water. What about cooler summers?
Well, remember, summers need to be cool enough so that not all the snow that falls in the winter melts. Then snow will pile up winter after winter, and glaciers of continental size can form. And the answer is
volcanic dust. When the atmosphere contains more dust and aerosols, more sunlight is reflected into space and doesn't reach the ground, making the continents cooler.
History records an example of volcanic dust cooling the climate. The eruption of Mount Tambora in 1815 is considered to be the greatest volcanic eruption witnessed by man, at least in recent recorded history.
In the summer of 1816, the next year, snow fell in June, and frost was seen in July and August in eastern Canada and New England. The frost caused crop failures. The history books record it as the year without a summer. And that was the effect of just one volcano.
Now imagine the impact of thousands of volcanoes that were associated with a global flood.
Yeah. When we come back, we'll look at some discoveries that support this Ice Age model.
Did you know that the Earth's magnetic field has reversed direction or flipped multiple times in the past? The evidence for these reversals is rock solid, because when molten rock cools, certain mineral grains align with the Earth's magnetic field, thus recording the direction of the Earth's magnetic field at the time in the solidified rock. Previously, most geologists thought that a single reversal would take many thousands of years. However, creation physicist Dr. Russell Humphreys reasoned they must have happened quickly to fit within the biblical timescale. So Dr. Humphreys made a prediction that quickly cooling thin lava flows would be found that recorded fast changes in the direction of the magnetic field. This prediction was later proven correct. Scientists were shocked to find major magnetic field changes had occurred within weeks in a single lava flow. They published this in the regular scientific literature. Thus, yet another scientific prediction based on biblical history proved to be correct.
To find out more from Creation Ministries International, visit our website, creation.com.
If you made it this far, well done. Please take a second right now to smash that like button and hit subscribe to keep updated with more content like this.
Yeah, and if you appreciate the content, others may too. Share this video on social media to spread the Bible upholding information more widely.
You never know how God will use it to get people thinking more deeply about the accuracy of the Bible. We just described how the global flood, as described in the Bible, produced the conditions needed to generate an ice age. Now let's add some detail.
Okay, regarding the timing, let's talk about timing. The Ice Age began during the first winter after when Noah and his family exited the ark. And each winter after that, the snow accumulated and continued to pile up in the higher latitudes and the continental interiors and in the alpine regions.
Why? Because for many years after the flood, Volcanoes continued to erupt around the edges of the new continental landmasses, and the ensuing dust and aerosols kept summer temperatures cool.
Now, centuries passed before the continental edges stabilized enough that the volcanoes died down. Maximum coverage of the ice was reached about 500 years or so after the global flood. In northern portions of North America, in Greenland, and in Eurasia, so above 40 degrees latitude, the ice reached an average depth of about 700 meters. At the South Pole, it reached an average depth of about 1,200 meters.
Now, by this time, about 500 years after the flood, the oceans cooled to where their surface temperatures were about the same as today, so less evaporation and less snowfall. The number of active volcanoes had also dropped. The atmosphere became clearer, and summers in the higher latitudes became warmer, and the ice began melting.
Yeah, so it's estimated that the continental glaciers melted back at about 10 meters per year for about 200 years. So the Ice Age lasted in total about 700 years or so.
So there's an Ice Age model that's actually capable of producing an Ice Age. Sadly, but not surprisingly, it's mostly ignored because it's biblically based.
Right.
Of course, the Bible can't possibly be true.
No, it can't be true. Well, the Bible is true. And since it records the true history of the earth, models based on that history tend to have much greater explanatory power than models not based on it.
Like the 60-some-odd models that don't work.
Right.
Now, let's add some detail to what the Ice Age was like and some other events associated with it. How about the mammoths?
Okay, mammoths. Let's talk about mammoths. Actually, explaining the burial and freezing of mammoths is another challenge for the uniformitarian evolutionary explanations of the slow and gradual onset of the Ice Age over many thousands of years, and then its slow ending. But again, starting with the true history, the real history of the biblical flood, and the Ice Age model derived from it, it provides a framework for understanding the mammoths.
Now, remember, the ocean water was warmer because of activities during the flood. Because of the warm Arctic Ocean after the flood, the ice sheets didn't cover the sea or the lowlands near the sea, resulting in a relatively temperate climate near the sea. And that's where the mammoth remains are most abundant.
Yeah, warm oceans moderate the climate in the areas near them. For example, Churchill, Manitoba is located on the west shore of Hudson Bay, where the water is very cold. It has the nickname, the polar bear capital of the world. But it's at about the same latitude as Inverness, Scotland. But Inverness has much milder winters than Churchill because of the Atlantic Gulf Stream, which is warm and it moderates its winters.
A significant event occurred during the Ice Age, somewhere between 500 and 700 years after the flood. The Big Chill.
Big chill.
The Arctic Ocean froze over for the first time. Fresh water from the melting continental ice sheets spilled into the ocean, floating on top of the salt water. It lowered the surface temperature of the Arctic Ocean close to the freezing point, greatly reducing the ocean's moderating effect.
Yeah, with the Big Chill, lush vegetation along the coast died out. The ground froze during the first winter and has stayed frozen ever since. Permafrost now covers about 15% of the northern hemisphere's land area, including substantial areas of Alaska, Greenland, Canada, and Siberia.
And what catastrophe followed the Big Chill? Extinction.
Yep.
Many species of animals that lived along or near the shores of northern Canada and Siberia went extinct. They died from starvation, disorientation, and exhaustion. They were probably nearly extinct by the end of the first winter of the Big Chill.
Yeah, mass animal extinctions included mastodons, mammoths, saber-toothed tigers, horses, camels, giant peccaries, giant beavers, lions, giant short-faced bears, dire wolves, and ground sloths, and more.
North America was hit the hardest, with about 34 genera of large mammals becoming extinct. Some of their carcasses became entombed in the permafrost, and more than 50 whole carcasses of mammoths have been discovered in the recent past in Alaska and Siberia.
Now, we'll add more detail when we come back.
Most people have heard about the meteorite that hit the Earth and supposedly caused the extinction of the dinosaurs. Secular geologists refer to this as the KT extinction, and they regard it as one of the most significant mass extinctions, according to their deep time view of Earth history. However, did you know that the secular geologists have identified 7 other mass extinctions in the portion of the geological record that contains complex plant and animal life? This shows that scientists are increasingly recognizing the catastrophic nature of the geological record. This goes against old ideas of only slow and gradual processes being responsible for all the rocks and fossils. These new perspectives are much more in line with a biblical view of Earth history, whereby Noah's flood wiped out all air-breathing land animals not on the ark. No, there were not 8 mass extinctions in Earth history, but there certainly was one massive extinction event.
To find out more from Creation Ministries International, visit our website, creation.com.
Welcome back. We've been explaining how the Bible's history provides a solid foundation to develop an Ice Age model that works.
Yes, that's right. Yeah. So let's move forward a little bit. When did the Ice Age end? We know that humans were around when it ended because artifacts like spearheads have been found associated with mammoth carcasses. The flood was around 2350 to 2500 BC, somewhere around there. Beginning immediately after the flood, snow and ice built up for about 500 years right after the flood. Then continental glaciers melted over about a 200-year period, leaving only glaciers in the alpine regions and in mountains, and we still see some of those today, of course.
Now, that would place the end of the Ice Age somewhere around 1700 BC. Well, that's during the time when the Hebrews were slaves in Egypt.
Yeah, it was during the Ice Age that the events of the Tower of Babel took place, that migrants from Shinar crossed the Bering Strait on the Bering Land Bridge, which existed at that time, and arrived in North America. Some may have built boats. I mean, Noah built a big boat. They could have built boats and followed the coast. There are legends, actually, among some North American Aboriginals that speak of crossing the frozen sea. It's very interesting.
Now, there's another evidence that the Ice Age ended within the historical period, that is, the past 3,000 to 4,000 years, not 11,000 years ago, as many propose.
Right, yeah.
That is the presence of submerged ruins off the coasts of the continents. These submerged structures were built when water levels were lower because a lot of the seawater was being stored on land in the form of continental glaciers.
Yeah, when the glaciers began to melt, the sea level rose and the structures were submerged. For example, Heracleon and Canopus are 2 cities that guarded the gateway to Egypt. They're both near the mouth of the Nile River, just northwest of Alexandria.
Pavlopetri was a residential town off the coast of Greece that covered more than 30,000 square meters and included many buildings and streets. You can see a portion of it sketched out here based on what has been found so far. It was submerged around 1000 BC.
The shore temple of Mahabalipuram and the remains of a vast city about 5 miles long and 2 miles wide in the Bay of Cambay, almost 80 kilometers off the coast of India. Both of those are off the coast of India.
There are also ruins of a city stretching for kilometers along the Yucatan Channel that runs between Cuba and Yucatan, Mexico.
Yeah, man, what a massive impact the end of the Ice Age had, didn't it?
Now, a natural question is, since the Bible records details about the flood, why doesn't it give details about the Ice Age?
Okay, fair question.
2 portions of the Bible describe events which occurred while the Ice Age was in progress. These are Genesis chapters 9 to 50 and the book of Job.
Okay, but those events took place in lower latitudes. In other words, closer to the equator at a great distance from the developing glaciers. So Abraham and Job, and who lived around the same time, would probably not have thought of themselves as living in an ice age. Instead, the Middle East and even the Sahara Desert was well watered during the Ice Age, unlike today.
But there are hints in the book of Job that there was more snow and ice during the Ice Age. There are more references to cold weather like frost, snow, and ice in the book of Job than in any other book in the Bible. Here's a sample. From whose womb did the ice come forth, and who has given birth to the frost of heaven? The waters become hard like stone, and the face of the deep is frozen.
So although not described in as much detail as the flood, there actually are hints in Scripture of the Ice Age. The Ice Age fits with the Bible. Yeah. Okay, but when Ice Age researchers rule out the Bible's history, when they run their simulations to model an Ice Age, not only do they find it difficult to explain how an Ice Age started, not surprisingly, there are other problems too.
When they reduce the parameter for the amount of sunshine hitting the Earth, some snow and ice build up, but end up covering areas that were never glaciated.
Whoops.
One paper in the Journal of Climate says, We now have glaciation, but mainly outside the area where it existed during the last ice age. How's that work?
Well, yeah, those areas are the lowlands of Siberia and Alaska and northwest Yukon Territory in Canada. They were never glaciated.
They can't explain this discrepancy, but a model that has warm oceans after the flood easily explains the lack of glaciation in the coastal lowlands. And that's where the woolly mammoths lived and ate a lot of plants.
Yeah, plants don't grow real well when they're buried under tons of snow.
And today, their carcasses are found there entombed in permafrost, along with other extinct species like a woolly rhinoceros discovered in 2020 in Siberia.
Yeah, another challenge for secular Ice Age models is the lack of vegetation in glacial till. Glacial till is the unsorted sediment left over by tons of ice moving over the land and scouring the landscape and pulverizing rocks.
If the continental glaciers had formed slowly over thousands of years, fossilized remnants of trees and other plant debris should be found mingled with the rock debris.
Yeah.
But there's very little.
Yeah, with the post-flood Ice Age model, the rarity of vegetation debris indicates that the Ice Age began immediately after the flood, when the snow and ice began to build up on the mostly barren ground, no trees.
It's been suggested that there have been up to 5 major ice ages. But since scientists who believe that there wasn't a global flood can't explain how even one could start, it's rather far-fetched to suggest that there have been 5.
Yeah. Now, there are good reasons supporting the claim that there's only been a single ice age. First, most glacial till is of local or nearby rock. If there had been multiple ice ages, we would expect to find the till moved in from other regions in front of successive advancing glaciers and a mixing of till types. We don't find that.
Second, fossils are extremely rare in the till of glaciated regions. If fossils were laid down between ice ages, we should expect to find some there.
Yeah. Third, the existence of frozen remains of animals in Siberia and Alaska, for example, they wouldn't have been preserved during the warm periods between these multiple ice ages. So anyways, there's 3 reasons why there's only one ice age, and there are more that we could talk about.
Sometimes our speakers are asked by members of the audience, most of whom are church attenders, if and when there was an ice age.
Yes, and we can happily say, yes, there was, and then go on to explain how and when it happened.
Right. We also relate this whole issue to apologetics, giving a reasoned defense of Christianity.
Yes.
And we say how it is only possible to explain how the Ice Age developed and how some species of animals went extinct suddenly if we base our explanation on the meteorological events that occurred immediately after the flood.
That's right, yeah. Scientists with a commitment to the evolutionary long-age paradigm can't explain the Ice Age. There's massive problems there. On the other hand, the Bible wins. The Bible's true. And because it is, when scientific models are developed based on the history that the Bible records, they have great explanatory power. They're good models.
They should be.
Yeah.
Well, that's a positive and encouraging message.
Yes.
And a challenging message for those who don't believe the Bible.
Yeah, and that's why our whole ministry exists. It's not just for people who overtly don't believe the Bible, but even for new Christians, young believers, and people in churches that have questions. A lot of people have questions, even though they're solid in the faith in other ways.
Right. Some of those questions they may get asked from other people, and you want to have answers to those.
Wonderful. So we'll see you next week, and remember, Christianity is an evidence-based faith.
And science supports Scripture.
Wait, don't go just yet. If you learned something from this episode, then others will too.
Share this video as widely as you can, and if you haven't yet, click that like button.
Yeah, leave a comment about something that was new information to you or what you found most interesting, or engage with other comments.
Those activities help push the video to other people's feeds. Thanks for watching.